For joining the webinar tonight. My name is Peter Larson. I'm the chair of the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine. I hope that's what you're here for. And we're going to have a discussion tonight about the very aggressive attack by UN Watch on Francesca Albanese. As some of you will know, that she has appealed to a number of foreign ministers of France and Germany and Italy, asking that she be asked to resign. It's a very aggressive attack. Our organization runs from Ottawa on unceded Indigenous territory, and in consideration of that, a board member of OFIP, our organization, makes an annual donation to Inspire, which is a registered national Indigenous charity for education for young people. So UN Watch used a fraudulently manipulated video of Albanese's remarks at a recent forum to argue that she was anti-Semitic. And that led her to pressure and induce foreign ministers of Germany, France, and several other countries to call for her resignation, totally unwarranted. So Albanese is not the first UN Special Rapporteur to be attacked by Israel and the lobby. And tonight we're going to discuss the history of those attacks, and importantly, what we can do as Canadians to try to help protect not only her, but the institution, the system of UN rapporteurs in general. As a quick reminder, the UN Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territories is an independent expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council, and their role is to investigate and report and bring to light human rights violations in the occupied territories. And that includes reporting to the United Nations, and those reports get widely publicized. Albanese's reports have been particularly hard-hitting. They've certainly hit a nerve. The most recent report highlighted the role of corporate actors in sustaining Israel's illegal occupation, apartheid, and the unfolding genocide. So to help us better understand her situation and what we can do about it, I'm thrilled to have two experts with me, both of whom were previously held the same position that she had before. First of all, Richard Falk is an American professor emeritus of international law at Princeton. He is chairman of the board of trustees of Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitors. And in 2008 to 2014, he was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. I'm also thrilled to have my friend, Michael Lynk. Many of you on the call will know Michael personally. He's a Canadian legal academic. He was associate professor at UWO. From 2016 to 2022, he was the special rapporteur following up the work of Professor Falk. So for this evening, I'm going to ask them a few questions. We'll have some conversation amongst ourselves for maybe 20 minutes or so, and then I'll open the floor to people to ask questions either directly or by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. In the background, my colleague Grafton Ross will be monitoring the questions in the Q&A. He'll also be monitoring the chat. I've enabled the chat so you can use the chat function to ask questions of the panelists or even argue with each other, and that's all quite legitimate to do so as well. So first of all, I'll say, Professor Falk, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate you fitting this into your busy schedule.
Glad to be with you and to be with Michael.
And as I say, Michael is an old friend. Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I spoke to you about 3 weeks ago, say, what can we do to try to generate more support in Canada for Francesca Albanese? And one of the things we thought of is organizing this webinar so people would maybe focus more on the issue and also think a bit about what can be done. So Michael, thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure.
Okay. So let me just start off just by asking either one of you to sort of remind us. I read there what the UN says formally is the role of the rapporteur, but what is the importance of the rapporteur in the UN system as you see it? Maybe Professor Falk, I'll ask you first.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's an extremely important innovation in the effort of the UN to be somewhat liberated from political considerations and pressures and create a truth-telling procedure that Francesca's role has exemplified to provide the public and the UN itself with a reality-grounded understanding of controversial international events that are extremely threatening to the human rights of groups of peoples, and nowhere more sustainedly and more severely than in occupied Palestine. And it's a crucial thing because there are political considerations, particularly evident in this context, that lead members of the Security Council to hide the reality and to provide a kind of camouflage for a false set of rationalizations of the most extreme encroachments on fundamental human rights. So it's led the public and much of the media to follow that kind of state propaganda that obscures human rights violations, even when they attain the heights of apartheid and even more so, a sustained genocide.
So as I understand it, Professor Falk and Michael, I'll call Michael, what, Michael.
You called me Richard.
Okay,
I don't.
okay, that's fine. Okay,
I
thank you.
don't.
One of the tasks is to do their investigation, gather information, and then make reports to the UN in various instances. Maybe you can just tell us a bit about how you did or did that.
Well, what we're required to do is issue 2 detailed reports a year. They even tell us that it can't be any more than 10,700 words. Or there's a very UN style to all this. But Richard and I weren't told what to write our reports about. We could choose the topic, we could choose the language, we could choose the analysis and the framework, and then we were free to deliver that report. We would issue and deliver 1 report a year, usually in the spring to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, and in the fall to the UN General Assembly in New York. And I was entirely free to choose the topics that I did. Among the topics that I wrote about were whether the Israeli settlements now were war crimes under international law, whether the Israeli occupation had now crossed the bright red line into illegality. And my very last report was on the question of apartheid. And I wrote about a range of other topics as well. I obviously had read all of the reports that Richard had written, and Richard's predecessor, the esteemed John Dugard from South Africa, had written when he was in the position of special rapporteur. We also use platforms like issuing statements, sometimes by ourselves, sometimes in conjunction with other special rapporteurs, that would get fed throughout the UN system. And then I would use speaking engagements or writing op-eds for newspapers in order to be able to publicize the concerns that we had and the issues that we wind up being faced with. And I made good use of those. I learned from Richard and John's experiences and how they did that as well. And I can remember the very first time I went to the UN after being appointed in 2016. I remember meeting a very esteemed international human rights law professor who was one of the special rapporteurs at that time. And he welcomed me and said, "We're glad to have you aboard." And he paused, and then he said to me, "Michael, you know that you've probably got the most difficult of special rapporteur positions as special rapporteur in Palestine. and the air went out of my balloon a little bit, but I found out pretty quickly that he was right. And actually, later on that same week, I met Richard for the first time, and Richard, in a much more encouraging way, also said that the path was difficult, but that you develop thick skin. And he told me about his travails with the UN, with the Israeli government, with the Israel lobby, and he did a very good job of preparing me for what was going to come.
I want to get on to, in a second, I want to get on to the Israel lobby and the way that each of you have run into issues with the lobby. Before I do that, give us a bit of a sense of how, when you report to the General Assembly or report to the Human Rights Council, do people respond positively? Do they say, are they bored? Are they enthusiastic? Are they, I mean, they're all constrained by their own country's policies. What's the feeling when you're making it in a room, making it, when you look around the room, apart from what the darts that the Israelis or the Americans are looking at you, what's the feeling around the room otherwise?
I think that's an intriguing question that's very rarely posed. But my experience, and it may, of course, differ from what Michael experienced, was that they, as you suggest, they, in their formal statements and their questions, they reflected what they were told to say. But quite often they'd come up informally to me and say, you know, we really agreed with you, but we were under instructions to say what we said. And I accepted that. I mean, I understood that that was the the role of a loyal government bureaucrat. But it showed that there was a kind of tension even within the states most associated with supporting Israel. These were mainly people from North America or Europe that had this kind of double vision about our reports. I want to say one other thing to supplement what Michael said. Part of Francesca's being so controversial has to do with the fact that our mandates or our period of service reflects the setting within Israel-Palestine. And her period of service has coincided with the most horrifying genocide. And she's been so consistently courageous and articulate in bringing this to the public attention. And aside from the attacks within the UN, the US did this extraordinary thing of sanctioning her and really doing something that undermined or tried to undermine the whole role of the special rapporteur, which is premised on political independence. It's an unpaid position, and it has no civil service status, and it allows the Secretary Generals, in my case, Ban Ki-moon, to say he would love to dismiss me, but he can't. You know?
Can you, Michael, maybe you can just remind people, in case we're not all familiar with it, what are the sanctions that the U.S. has put on Francesca recently? I've read the list, but I couldn't rattle it off.
Right. So these sanctions, let's keep in mind, are designed by the United States laws to sanction, terrorists, evildoers, bad guys in the international stage. And here, the United States under Trump has sanctioned Francesca. But I should also point out they've also sanctioned 8 judges and the 3 lead prosecutors at the International Criminal Court. And there's indications they actually may sanction the entire International Criminal Court. Why? Because they've accepted application or complaints with respect to Israel's apartheid and settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, but also that there's evidence being gathered with respect to what Israel has done in Gaza as well. With respect to Francesca, the sanctions mean for her that she's frozen out of the American banking system, which in effect means you're frozen out of much of the international banking system, because the sanctions would extend to any bank within the reach, I guess, of American sanctions that would wind up continuing to support her. It means she can't use credit cards. The three largest credit cards companies in the world are all American. This has compelled the EU to consider, particularly with respect to the threat of the International Criminal Court being fully sanctioned, as to whether or not they're going to create some kind of firewall in Europe to protect their banking system and to create European credit card system. It means that any properties that she has, or she and her husband have in the United States, are impounded. The only property that I understand from Francesca that she and her husband own is a condo in Washington. They cannot sell that condo. They cannot rent that condo. They cannot dispose of it in any way. It means that her daughter, who is an American citizen because she was born in the United States, cannot give her any gifts or money. If I was to give money to Francesca, say to help her with her legal bill, because she is trying to challenge through litigation the sanctions, that person giving her money would be sanctioned as well. She cannot go to the United States, so she was unable to deliver her report in October to the UN General Assembly in New York.
Aren't UN officials exempt from American visa requirements?
Well, may you ask? In 1946, the United States signed onto the Convention on the Immunities and Privileges of UN Officials, and that's part of the host agreement that the United States has signed with the UN in hosting a UN facility, i.e., the UN headquarters. They're supposed to respect the privileges and immunities of UN officials and allow them to freely come to the United States and do their official duties. That can't happen with respect to that. So ironically, Francesca delivered by video conference her report to the General Assembly in October from South Africa, where she had just delivered the annual Nelson Mandela Foundation lecture, which I thought was very appropriate in the circumstances. So all of this means that, if she wants to fly, she has to arrange for other people to be able to get her tickets. That's probably not easy to wind up doing. Those who wind up assisting her may want to be very cautious about wanting to go into the United States in case their name has now appeared as someone who's helping Francesca evade the American sanctions.
Okay. When a special rapporteur goes about his or her work, does the UN demand or expect that, in this case, that Israel provide access, that they give some help to see what's going on, to travel around and meet people and so on? What's the expectation and what's the reality there? Do they provide you a free bus, Michael? What's the?
Richard, Richard has a better story than I do.
Yes, I have a tale of woe that's responsive to the question. After I was appointed, Israel objected to my appointment, but later on, I was preparing to go on the initial fact-finding mission, and the easiest and appropriate way to go was by way of Israel. And the people in Geneva prepared an agenda and showed that to the Israeli consulate there, and they approved the agenda, and it involved meetings with some of the Palestinian officials on the West Bank and visiting both Gaza and the West Bank. When I arrived with two assistants to the Ben Gurion airport in Tel Aviv, they went ahead of me and went without problems on the basis of their visas. They told me to sit and wait, and eventually said that I was denied admission and was being expelled. And in the meantime, I would be detained in what amounts to the airport prison, which was a couple miles away. And I was put in a cell with 6 other people. It was an interesting experience, but it really was the opposite of cooperation.
Yeah.
And they took my computer, and I don't know what they did, whether they tried to extract the files. And
We're talking about 15 years ago, right? Something from some time ago.
yes, this was in 2008, just before, it was shortly before Christmas, and it was before the first of several Israeli military incursions
Right.
into Gaza. And it was, I think, partly prompted by the fact that they didn't want adverse criticism to surface at a time that they felt was sensitive to their plans for a military operation.
But that didn't change, though, right? I mean, it continued to be a policy.
Yes, I was never allowed to come in by way of Israel. I did go to Gaza 2012 by way of Egypt. It was prior to the coup in Egypt, and there was sort of an ambivalent relationship to these issues. I mean, I think an important aspect of this was that the UN didn't support me at all when this happened. And and actually, my two assistants went to Jerusalem and had a good time and didn't do anything to mount some kind of formal protest.
Mm.
And the UN itself, and that's why I think this position is so important if it's properly protected. The UN itself is so sensitive to criticism from its permanent members of the Security Council. And that criticism is very forthcoming in anything that touches on Israel's interests in a way that is critical. And that brings me to say one other thing, that because of this responsiveness of the European and North American countries to pressure from Israel and the US, there is a general kind of reluctance to raise these issues in any kind of meaningful way. And it leaves the impression that the UN is not really upholding the political independence, which is critical to doing the work of a special rapporteur in an effective and persuasive way. And this was intensified because Israel, in my first year, they responded substantively to the criticisms that were made, including the UN Watch, which is basically a Zionist pressure organization. But after the first year, they didn't bother with substance. They ignored the substance of the criticisms, which were, I think, accurate but harsh, and concentrated on discrediting me and defaming in a defamatory way. They didn't even feel constrained by truth, and nothing was done to deny them the credentials of acting in that way, which had an influence on the media, because the media got interested in, was I or was I not a credible human rights expert, but rather a partisan.
Right.
So it's important, I think, an important development.
Yeah. Michael, I think that I remember when you were named, the Canadian government was not only not helpful, was joined in, was basically ad hominem kind of attack on you rather than, and your experience was, I think, parallel to what Richard is talking about.
In the sense of being attacked by UN Watch, when it became clear that my name was among the people they were considering in February and March of 2016, 10 years ago now, UN Watch had done I guess, a hit piece on all of the leading 10 candidates. So they were ready when it turned out my name wound up being approved by the Human Rights Council. And UN Watch attacked me for a number of things I didn't say. The key among them was the fact that they said I had compared the Israeli settlements to Nazi Germany. As that's sort of one example of the world turned upside down. And then within a day, you had questions in Parliament from conservatives attacking the then new Trudeau government with Stéphane Dion as foreign minister. And Stéphane Dion said in Parliament that the UN should choose someone else who was going to be impartial. So it was if, for a moment there, I thought the sky was falling. I was trying to respond to things I hadn't said. And Dion, you thought here was an accomplished academic, a political scientist from a leading university in Quebec who hadn't read anything that I had written, was only taking these hit points put out by UN Watch, and then wind up repeating them. Within a couple of days, I was able to get a meeting by phone with leading policy people in Stéphane Dion's office, and they said to me, we've read all the stuff. You didn't say this. You're a good guy. And I said, would you please have the foreign minister repeat that publicly, because I'm getting slammed all over by people quoting him. Oh, we can't do that. It would look like he was backtracking. Well, yes, backtracking wouldn't be a bad idea. It was the right thing to wind up doing. But wherever I went, particularly in Geneva, UN Watch would put a picture of me and then a picture of Stéphane Dion saying, that Lynk compares Israeli settlements to Nazi Germany, or Lynk is not partial because Stéphane Dion says so. And it's as if you say, you tell the lie, and then the lie gets believed when it gets repeated by somebody else coming back to you with regards to this. But yes, so I don't think I had quite the experiences, the negative attacks that Richard had. He bore much more than I ever had to do. But they were unhelpful, and they're meant to try to diminish you and diminish your credibility.
So just to sum up some of the key points that I picked up from you both. One is, first, of course, as Richard points out, the context is different. I mean, Israel is now credibly accused of genocide. That most organizations would say that it's genocide. The public opinion has turned against Israel in many countries around the world. The lobby is desperate to try to discredit credible critics, including using ad hominem arguments. And it seems that what Francesca is facing now didn't start with her, didn't start with Michael, didn't start with Richard. It may even have gone back farther than that. So maybe I can just turn our attention a little bit to what is new about the attack on Francesca, and also, or do you see this as just standard practice that they've been doing the same thing for the last 20 years?
Richard, you go
Uh,
first.
I think both things are true. They have been doing the same thing both to Michael and to myself. I had the special uh, st- uh, attractive quality for UN Watch that had a Jewish background, and that it was like pouring fuel on the fire. And I think that's the reason that I received so much attention, not that was welcome attention. But I think that the underlying situation is one where the failure of the UN to really stand behind its unpaid appointees when they are unfairly attacked, as distinct from being criticized by policy and factual or evidentiary arguments.
Can I
There's
just interrupt for a second to ask you when you say the UN is a huge organization of 10 or 15,000 employees. Do you mean the Security Council? Do you mean the Secretary General? Do you mean the Human Rights Council? Like, who is it that's not, in your view, doing what they should do, or what that we as citizens think the UN is supposed to be doing?
Well, it's both it's hard to situate it. It can be because it's sometimes responsive to the media, when and therefore what surfaces is if the Secretary General says something, or if one of us criticizes the UN for not upholding our political independence, then there's a kind of defensive reaction. So it's hard to say, and some of it's internal. That, for instance, I was under a lot of pressure, not only from UN Watch, but from the Palestinian Authority that had backed my appointment, but didn't like everything I said. Especially, they didn't like my description of the fact that Hamas was providing the governing authority in Gaza. And they put lots of pressure on me to resign.
Because of that.
Yeah, and they circulated rumors, happily false, that I was having severe health problems and couldn't carry out the mandate in a responsible way. And they also tried to say, "Oh, we will celebrate your performance if you resign." See, and because they supported me, they thought that I was their creature to control. Finally, when they gave up that effort, and but prior to that, they complained to the Secretary General, and particularly when I talked of some corruption in this West Bank that affected communications. I forget the exact context, but it involves some of the relatives of the Abbas, who was the head of the Palestinian
Right.
Authority. Uh, and so it's a complex landscape where it's hard to generalize or to particularize. but it combines this defamatory attacks from Zionist sources with this weakness of defense by those who should be and could be effective in neutralizing that kind of criticism. So it keeps it alive.
So just want to clarify a point. So neither of you were able to enter the occupied, apart from your trip to Gaza, neither of you were able to enter the West Bank or East Jerusalem. Is that right? During your mandates, you were not allowed to do that.
Correct.
And so you pick up your information by meeting with groups in Amman or whatever, where they could come and talk to you. Right. Okay.
Yes.
And I assume that's also true of Francesca. I assume that she faces the same obstacles from the Israeli government.
I was informally told I couldn't go in. I think Francesca's formally been told she's persona non grata, much like Richard was. So yeah, none of us have been able to get in.
Now I'm going to open it up to questions in a few minutes. So I just tell people, please put your Q&A questions in the Q&A. My colleague Grafton Ross will be monitoring them in the background, or raise your hand and we'll see if we can fit in some direct verbal questions. But I have one question, particularly addressed to Michael, I guess, is what has Canada done so far in defense of, or not, Francesca, given these most recent attacks, but other ones that have come on beforehand? What's been Canada's position?
Yeah. I've not seen anything that Canada has said formally with respect to Francesca. To be clear, on the 7th of February, she was giving a presentation by video link to a forum organized by Al Jazeera on the media, and she was on a panel on international law. And she actually was on the same panel as Madam Bensouda, the former chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. And she said something to the effect of, she pointed to global finance, she pointed to high-tech companies as being part, I guess, of the contributions that enabled Israel to commit genocide in Gaza. And then she said, this is the common enemy of humanity. And she was referring to those institutions and corporations. I think she spoke for around 5 or 6 minutes. The next day, a video was released by UN Watch, which had her compressed and edited her statement, and it appeared very clearly that she was calling Israel the common enemy of humanity. And then all of a sudden, the fireworks started. The French foreign minister called for her resignation. The German foreign minister called for her resignation. The Italian, the Czech foreign ministers, and the Austrian foreign ministers all called for her.
But Canada did not. Is that correct?
Sorry, I did not hear anything. I didn't hear anything coming from Ottawa with respect to this. Mm-hmm. And then when at a question period the following week, on the 12th of February, the spokesperson for Antonio Guterres was asked about this. And he replied quite laconically. He said, we don't agree with much that he says. And that was about as strong.
Much that she says.
Yes, as much as she says.
Yeah, that's right. We don't agree with as much of what she says. And that was about as strong a defense as they wound up offering with respect to this. Right. So, and he's alleged to have said before, sometime in 2025, calling her a awful person or a horrible person in the presence of somebody else. So she's not getting the kind of support she needs from the UN with regards to. I should say, though, that the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, their office did offer a pretty solid defense of Francesca, without saying we agree with everything she says. That they said, her position is important. She's doing a credible, good job, and I think that was perhaps as much as you would expect from the UN, but certainly no one should expect the kind of you're off on your own attitude that the Secretary General's office gave.
And in terms of Canada, I remember Francesca was here about 1.5 years ago in Ottawa, and the government of Canada refused to meet with her. In fact, she was even invited and then uninvited to speak at the Foreign Affairs
Correct.
Senate
Yeah.
committee. So they continue to call her an anti-Semite, but don't meet with her to talk to her about what her ideas are. So the Canadian government so far has had a pretty negative role in this, as I
Yeah,
see.
and I should say, as a Canadian who was a special rapporteur, the most I ever was able to do was meet with a relatively junior bureaucrat within Canadian Foreign Affairs once during the period of time that I was there. In Europe, I met with heads of state, I met with heads of government, I met with foreign ministers. I also met with Antonio Guterres. The doors are supposed to open for special rapporteurs, particularly one as significant as the one on Palestine. But I continually got the cold shoulder when it came to trying to meet with people of influence in
Right.
Ottawa.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
I had the
sorry.
same experience in the US, of course.
Mm.
And shockingly, I think Italy itself, where Francesca, of course, is a citizen of Italy, and they joined with France
Yeah.
in
They're
calling
calling for
for,
resignation.
yes, and I mean to not support a national personality who's brought great credit to the institution, to the role of women in the world, and has been recognized as by organizations giving her proposing her for a Nobel Peace Prize and calling her the Woman of the Year. So you find the contrast between these governments that purport to be liberal democracies with the more sensitive to liberal values civil society organizations. And that's part of the, I think, crisis of democracy
Mhm.
in the Western world at this point.
Right. So, Grafton, are you still there? Have you got some questions you can fish out of our fishbowl?
I am here indeed, and a couple of questions about the sort of the running of the United Nations itself and the roadblocks that are being put in place of its functioning by the great powers. Two questions. There's what could be done about the misuse of the veto? What options would be available for addressing that? And is it time to move the United Nations headquarters out of the United States and over to South Africa, for example?
Who wants to tackle that? A little bit
Let
beyond
Richard
the
go
remit
first.
of the special
I should say
rapporteur.
Richard has written an extremely good book recently with respect to the United Nations, and I'm happy to give him a plug for that, so he can speak authoritatively on this matter.
Well, certainly, I think there's a good case that could be made for moving the UN out of the United States as its headquarters, because the US has demonstrated that it gives priority to its foreign policy over its commitments, legal commitments, moral commitments to provide a safe haven for the activities that are entrusted to the UN. And therefore, I think if it was another country, if it was, let's say, Pakistan or Kenya or another country in the world, there would be a furor in the Western world demanding that the headquarters be shifted. So we see this hegemonic kind of deference to the US, despite its record as not really living up to its commitments to be a neutral, safe haven for UN activities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know it's outside the remit of the special rapporteur, but do you have thoughts about how to overcome the misuse of the veto in the Security Council?
Let me offer a suggestion here. It's the Americans may all of the 5 veto-wielding permanent members may be reluctant or opposed to getting rid of the veto. But there's a wonderful precedent with an American congressional government that should be followed. If a bill passes the Senate and the House of Representatives, goes to the president's office in the White House, is vetoed, that veto can be overridden by a supermajority from the House of Representatives and the Senate. And that used to happen with some frequency. I recall when I was younger and interested in American government. If that was used and adopted for the United Nations, a veto issued by one of the 5 permanent members, right now they have to explain their position to the General Assembly, but it doesn't overturn the veto. If the General Assembly is given the power by a supermajority, let's say 60% of the members, to overturn the veto, that would give a much greater sense of democratic movement, I believe, in the United Nations, but it would weaken the powers of the 5, and particularly the United States. The U.S. since 1973 has issued, I think, 48 vetoes pertaining to Israel that were critical of Israel. It's the only one of the 5 permanent members with veto powers that's ever issued a veto to kill a resolution critical of Israel. And in his memoirs, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General, said, it's the U.S. possessiveness of this particular file and its willingness to use or abuse its veto, which has stymied the United Nations on the longest running issue on its agenda.
One point, Michael, though, is that in order to give effect to your suggestion, you'd have to amend the charter.
It would. Yeah.
And that would require the unanimous support of the 5 veto powers, because they need to they need to be unanimous in recommending an amendment. See, so people don't understand that the UN Charter was designed to serve the geopolitical interests of the winners of World War II. And there's no other justification that makes any sense than to free them from the obligations of the Charter and of international law more generally.
Yeah.
Some people have argued that the UN and the UN system, because of the things you're just talking about, is little by little losing its relevance, and unless it undertakes a significant reform, it'll be ignored, as in the attack on Iran, for example. There's not even any pretense of looking for UN. So you guys are at the pointy edge of that, because the attack on Gaza that you've been watching up close, and now on the West Bank, the UN has proven itself quite unable to do anything about it, and that puts into question the value of the declining value of that institution.
No question about that. But it shouldn't be seen as such a dramatic institutional break. The UN didn't do anything about the Vietnam War either, or the Ukraine war. It's been marginalized when the leading geopolitical actors, especially Russia, Soviet Union, and the US, resorted to aggressive force. Korea may be the only major exception, and it's quite controversial because the Soviet Union was boycotting the Security Council at that time, and it was possible to empower the UN.
And just before you speak there, Michael, I remind anybody in the audience to raise your hand if you want. Click on the raise hand if you want to ask a question directly, or Grafton will fish out something out of the Q&A. Michael?
I was about to say that the question of Palestine has haunted the United Nations for almost in its entire history. The United Nations was created in 1945, became effective in 1946. In 1947, the UN commissioned a special committee to study the future of Palestine, and it wound up with the UN General Assembly voting in November of 1947 for a resolution to partition Palestine against the fervent wishes of its majority indigenous population. But at that time, the UN was a much different UN with about 55 members compared to 193 members now. But when you think of it, when you think of the challenges to international law and the challenges to our international political architecture, you can say from Palestine to Palestine, for almost the entire history of the United Nations, this question of Palestine has wound up haunting it, from the creation of Israel in 1948 and the exile and expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians, to the wars in the Middle East in the 1950s and 1960s that had always had Palestine as part of the subcontext, to the ability of the new global South to pass resolutions both at the Security Council and at the General Assembly in support of Palestine, which Israel has been in violation of. The prohibition against settlements, the prohibition against annexation, the prohibition against the separation wall, the demand that Israel recognize the application of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is the essential body on the laws of war and occupation, and all of that, where the UN has wound up showing, if you like, its greatest disgrace with not being able to enforce the resolutions that they have adopted, usually comes with respect to the question of Palestine.
Grafton, have you got another question for us?
Well, I have a question on my own, I guess. Israel and the United States have been attacking the United Nations and its institutions for a long time now, not only yourselves, but the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, UNRWA, etc. Do you think that Israel will break the United Nations, or will the United Nations bend Israel to its will?
I think that's a very appropriate question, but I find it impossible to give a responsible answer, because so much depends on whether there's a important change in the political outlook of the U.S. toward global order and its whole demeanor. I think that's less of a possibility in Israel, but it's not beyond the realm of kind of conjecture. No one expected South Africa to voluntarily give up apartheid or release Nelson Mandela after 27 years in prison. Those were very sudden, unexpected. I was in South Africa a few weeks before those developments occurred, and no one, left, right, or center, anticipated what happened. So I think we have to live with a certain level of uncertainty, but struggle for what we believe should be the outcome. And the outcome certainly should be a triumph of the UN and its general framework with reforms and the subordination of the behavior of countries that think they are not accountable to any legal or moral constraints.
The only thing I'll add to that is a reminder that the United Nations in many ways represents or reflects the fractures of the world. Somebody early on, I think it may have been one of the early secretary generals, said that the purpose of the UN was not to get us to heaven, but was to save us from hell. Uh, I think we have to understand that as Richard would often point out, the geopolitical architecture of the modern world is reflected in the UN itself. And as much as it struggles as an institution to provide clear guidance on fundamental principles and values, it also reflects all of the infighting that occurs on other stages in the world as well. I think the best we can expect from the United Nations that it will continue as an effective institution. It does heroic work on a wide range of areas that we often don't see on women, on children, on food security, and peacekeeping in a lot of areas where it doesn't get very much attention. We see its faults and some of its deep faults because Palestine is such a prominent issue on the international stage and represents, if you like, the dividing line between essentially the global north and the global south. And this stalemate reflects the inability to try to push international law and UN resolutions to resolve Israel and Palestine on a rights-based approach.
We're getting now to the end of our time, and I would like to spend a few minutes just trying to address the issue of what practically we can do, what practical help we can be to defending both Francesca Albanese and the institution itself. Most of my audience here are Canadians, so I'm particularly looking to Michael. I'm sure there's no magic bullet. We can all think of writing letters to our MPs, but what efforts are you aware of in Canada, in any event, to do something about this? Michael, I'm putting you on the spot here, but
sure. I wish I could say something, meaningful with respect to this. I mean, one thing I do notice in the past while, particularly with the governance of Canada over the last 10 plus years by the Liberal Party, is that the diaspora communities, the large diaspora communities that began to form in Canada in the 1970s and 1980s as we made more liberal immigration laws, has resulted in the fact that the Liberal Party, used to be where these diaspora communities would offer their support politically. And then these diaspora communities became more politically confident and said, no, we want our own representatives elected as members of parliament. And Gaza became a fracture point within the Liberal Party, primarily because of many of these Liberal MPs who came from diaspora communities who understood, if you like, what had gone on in the global South over the last 80 years and knew the place of Palestine with respect to that. So I think, happily I'm saying that we're slowly beginning to move towards that. And if I can show one example, it was the difference between the word salad of a statement that was issued by Prime Minister Carney on Saturday, the day the attacks began, where he simply said Iran is the center of evil in the Middle East and instability and insecurity, and we want to see the United States succeed in ending the nuclear program and ending Iran's threat, to saying yesterday when he arrived in Australia that this appears to be showing the weakness of the international order, and it appears prima facie to be a violation of international law. I think he was pushed by Canadian public opinion. I think he was pushed by a lot of probably resentment within his own caucus, coming largely from this diaspora community. So
you also had people like Axworthy and people like John Allen and others,
and as well as them as well, the sort of the old guard who were around in 2003 and helped push Canada to take a position that kept them out of the war in Iraq. So we see these divisions. And I'm glad to see that they're working their way through. And Carney is beginning to recognize the limits of what he can and can't do with respect to that. I was surprised on Saturday when he issued a statement. I said, "Where is Davos, man?" This sounded his statement on Saturday was such a contrast to what he had said in Davos 6 weeks previous to that. And now he's slowly coming back. He's being pulled back to the orbit of trying to follow through on what he actually said.
I'm not aware, maybe Michael, excuse us, Richard, for us talking about inside Canada here for the moment, because we're trying to see what we can get going here. I'm I'm not aware of whether the United Church, for example, whether any of the church groups have made statements on, in the past they have, but whether they have made statements on this specifically. There are lots of faculties or human rights organizations in various universities. People on the call tonight are involved in any of those organizations or involved with the United Church or the Mennonite Church or the Anglican Church. I think that kind of broad pressure is probably as effective as talking to an MP directly, and student organizations and so on. I don't know. I don't know of course, I don't know who's on our listing tonight, but we need to have a broad awareness of the fact that this is happening, that it's weakening the UN. It's an unfair attack on this very brave and very principled woman, and that we can all, in one way or another, lend our energies to row this boat in the right direction.
Well, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the public attention and the media focus has been preoccupied now with the Iran war. And it's very hard to organize something effectively around the narrow issue of Francesca. But I think we should try. And it's a very important symbolic time to support someone who has so courageously and meaningfully stood against these pressures and told the truth. And it contrasts, of course, with the constant distortions of reality that Americans have come to associate with the Trump presidency. And for the first time, the public opinion polls show more sympathy for Palestine than for Israel. And in a very important and in a way disturbing manner, the government institutions, particularly Congress, is not really responsive to the will of the people when it comes to issues where special interests are so formidably well organized and well funded. And so it's been very hard to get a democratically responsive, effective pressure to support Francesca or to support the wider issue of some kind of justice for the Palestinian people.
Good point. Okay. I see there were two people have had their hand up for a while. I haven't been paying attention, so I apologize to them though. Mervyn, Reverend Mervyn Russell, do you want to say something or ask a question or make a point? Mervyn?
He may not know that he's okay.
Well, Peter, I did go to see Seema Arkan, who is my particular Liberal MP in Oakville. So somebody who comes from a minority group. She's of Turkish origin, in fact. And we were mentioning various things that we would like the government to attend to. And one of the things was, in fact, to do something about protesting the sanctioning of Francesca. What I noticed was immediately Seema looked over to her senior staff person as much as say, how are we going to deal with this? And nothing really followed. I didn't know at that time that Jolie had in actual fact refused to meet with Francesca earlier on. I learned that later on. Yeah. But I was surprised that from Seema, a female member.
She's a member of the Liberal Party, is she?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes, indeed. There was nothing in response, just this rather anxious look
Right.
towards her assistant.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Mervyn. That's interesting. Fatma, do you want to say something? Fatma, you there?
Yes, I just wanted to know, since he's being
Fatma, speak a little closer in the microphone. We can't hear you very well.
okay, I'm just asking about how do we support her financially, because she's been cut up, and can we raise funds for her through cryptocurrency? That's
Michael?
my question.
Good question, Fatma. Very practical question.
It is a very practical question. Francesca, one of the other consequences of the sanctions is that she cannot sue the American government with respect to its actions to sanction her. So there is a lawsuit has begun in the name of her daughter, her teenage daughter, who's an American citizen, to try to to attack the sanctions with respect to that. I know that the litigation is going to be very expensive. What I don't have an answer for right now is what are the safest ways of being able to get money to help Francesca and her family to fund this? Because if you were open in terms of giving her money to fund her litigation, I think that would probably put you on the sanctions list as well with the United States. Let me see if I can try to find an answer with respect to that. I mean, Richard may or may not know any better with respect to that, but I think I have a couple of ways, at least asking the question confidentially and seeing if I can find an answer.
If you can get leave a website or an email address, Michael, I can put it in. I will be sending out a follow-up email to everybody, including a video of this discussion tonight, and I'll put that information in it if you can find something in the next couple of days.
Well, let's figure out what's the safest way to
Sure.
spread that information as well.
We can all just put it in your name, Michael. It's all right.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. With that, I am going to thank first of all, thank our guests for attending tonight. We had a good crowd tonight. Thank you for your questions. Richard, just some final words you want to contribute before we wind up?
Well, thank you for moderating this and doing such a good job and keeping us focused on what I think is a crucial moral challenge to all of us. And I hope we had some effect in encouraging people, just organizing any kind of written or group activity that brings more visibility to this kind of persecution of a dedicated public servant who doesn't deserve this fate.
I
Yeah.
totally agree.
If I could
Michael,
just
some final
jump
words,
in.
Michael?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Michael?
Ditto. Richard said it all. I'm happy to attach myself to his remarks.
Grafton?
There have been many expressions of appreciation from the participants in this webinar, and I just wanted to read out one. You both and Francesca represent the best of the promise of international law. I'm appalled at how disrespectfully you have all been treated. Thank you for your principled courage and integrity. Thank you very much.
I think that all of us would agree with that. And thank you to the person for writing that. And Grafton, thank you for sharing it and for keeping an eye on the questions in the background. So with that, I'll wind up, and good luck to all of us. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you very much, Richard and Michael in particular. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye-bye.